men, because patriarchy tells women, here's what you can and can't do, here's what you can and cannot say, it makes you smaller. And patriarchy tells men, you can't have feelings, you can't make space for that. You need to be strong and powerful all the time. And so you have men that are struggling with intimacy because they've never been given permission to be intimate beings. And then you have women that are struggling with being able to name their needs, to take up space. So it hurts everybody across the board.
So a new episode of Community in Arabic with me, Anwar, and Malek. We're so happy today to be with Lena ElKhatib. She's Lebanese American, the founder of Avid Intimacy Practice. It's a private practice here in Chicago, and specialized in relationship and sex therapy. It's going to be an amazing conversation today. A lot of interesting topics that we need to touch on. But first, tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm excited for our talk today. Well, to start, like you said, my name is Lena, and this is my practice, Avid Intimacy. I'm a marriage and family therapist and a certified sex therapist. And I spend the vast majority of my day sitting with human beings, hearing their stories and working through that with them.
Great.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your background and your immigration journey. You're Lebanese American and your journey here.
Sure. So I bounced around a little bit. I was born here. My parents came here when my mom was 8 months pregnant with me, fleeing the war in Lebanon at the time. So after having me, we stayed here for a few years, and then when I was 7, we moved back to Lebanon. So I spent the formative years there, elementary school, high school, college. After graduating from college, my whole family moved back to the United States. And a big part of it was kind of an assumption that once my brother had already moved here, he's older, that once I graduate, it's where the opportunities were, it's where I would be able to find more work. So we all came here. And I joke about it a little bit, but it's actually true. I didn't do much research. It was one of those things where, you move to America. And as far as I was concerned, Toledo, Ohio and New York City might as well be the same thing. I ended up in
reality.
Right. But a lot of it was kind of, this is what you do. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, and I was going with the flow. But coming here was so much more than about work opportunities. Unintentionally, it became a chance for me to really learn more about myself by having this new world to compare myself to. So it was about the opportunity of finding work, but also kind of exploring myself in a different way.
Was Europe part of the thought process, or America was the only destination?
Dubai was.
Oh, Dubai, okay.
Yes. I moved here initially to Toledo, Ohio because of the whole not Googling thing. And I reached a point where it was either go to Dubai or go to Chicago. Gave Chicago a chance, and within 2 weeks I realized, okay, I can make this home.
This is it.
Feels like home,
Yeah.
Love it. And now Dubai is up and coming, but to me, in terms of city that grew organically, that you feel, there's a culture in it, there's a diversity. I feel Chicago is one of the top cities, not only in America, but in the world.
Yeah. And it was, for me, part of the issue with Dubai is that it would never be home.
Right.
And for me, it was important to make roots.
Agree.
I knew that it was not likely that I would live in Lebanon again, and so I wanted somewhere where I could make it mine, and that felt more possible here in Chicago.
Right.
What was the thought process behind going for psychology and that route of your professional career?
Yeah. I'd love to say I had this great 5-year plan and I knew point A to point B to point C, but I did a lot of zigging and zagging. Originally, I actually worked in advertising on the creative side. Loved it for a while, but it was very much not aligning with where I wanted to be, both lifestyle-wise, but also it just wasn't feeling fulfilling after a while. Not that, making an ad for Taco Bell was not, joyful and uplifting, but it gets old. So I started to look into other options, and this time I did use the Google.
Yes.
But I started to learn a little bit more about therapy and, thinking about the ways in which gender roles in particular would show up in family systems. That was something that was always interesting to me ever since I was a little kid. I was always, very keenly interested in the ways in which we do gender. So I went into therapy thinking it would be about focusing on specifically working with families on reevaluating their gender roles, which is still very much a part of my work.
Yes.
But while I was in the program, I took a sex therapy class, learned that sex therapy was a thing, because even within the therapy community, it's not very well known. And that's when, something clicked. And I just knew, it's cliche, but it was very much a calling kind of thing.
Right.
So it made sense in a lot of different ways.
So in your practice, you do like individual therapy, relationship therapy, and sex therapy with more focus on relationship and sex therapy. But, we'd love to talk about all of these. But before we dive in, therapy is kind of a taboo in the Middle East. There's a lot of sense of shaming to people who are seeking therapy. It's associated with mental illness. Do you feel like this is changing with the community, especially with all the trauma that we come from? People find more needs for it, and living in a society that's a lot more accepting of it.
Yeah, it's changing a lot for a lot of different reasons. But to some degree, especially here in the West, therapy is becoming mainstream. It's even becoming cool. It's kind of the thing where everyone has, their latte and their therapist. So as it's becoming more and more mainstream here, naturally some of that is kind of coming into our own societies. But I think within the Arab community, the notion of aib, you don't air your dirty laundry. You don't talk about anything. You don't ever want to be judged. Secrecy is a big part of our culture. Do what you want to do, but don't talk about it. And therapy is very much the opposite of that. And I think people have been starting to realize the detrimental effect of that. They don't want to live like that anymore. They don't want to hide. They don't want to put on the mask. So there's really a desire for people to make real changes in their lives. Alongside that, they're seeing this other community that is, embracing therapy and talking about it, and it's on TV, so they know more about what it's about. So the combination of those things happening, I think, has really opened up the path for people to seek therapy. Pandemic helped a lot, making it more accessible with telehealth. So for people that might have felt intimidated or unable to access going to a practice, they can do it from the comfort of their own home. It's helped a lot with people that, especially in our communities, especially within a family system or a couple, one partner may be afraid to let their other partner know that they're seeking therapy, so they want to keep it private. It's hard to do that if you're actually getting up and getting in the car and driving somewhere.
Right.
So now it's a way to be able to do it more discreetly if that's what you would want. So we know more about it. We know that we need it. We've been through pandemics. Our people have been through wars, refugee crises, on we go. So the trauma has gone higher and higher. And it's accessible now in a way that it never has been. So it's really created a new way for people to access help.
And it's a really good point that you mentioned, that Arab Americans and Arabs that live in the U.S. now, they're getting at least some influence from the American culture that therapy is okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to, if you're not feeling well, this saying that it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
And back in the Middle East, you still hear that عيب and it's not good. Let's keep it within family and all these sayings. To you, what are the Malek mentioned that we're gonna go through the segments of your practice, right? I know you told us that you focus more on relationship and sex therapy, but in terms of the relationship, it starts from the individual, right? And overall, like as an individual, what are the signs, or what are the factors that I need to be aware of to start thinking about, oh, maybe I should consider therapy as an option?
It's interesting that you phrase it that way, because as a relationship therapist, I actually don't believe that it starts with the individual.
Oh, really? Okay.
I believe that the individual starts from their family system, from our communities. So I really think that who we are is a product of the world that we're in, and our upbringing and whatnot. But to more specifically answer your question, and I the reason I had to pause on that, and I'm sorry, it's digressing from your question, is that we're very much in an era that celebrates individuality.
Yes.
We're in a country that celebrates individuality, and it's very important to me to really impress the collectivist values that we have from our cultures, that we are a we.
Yes.
And the I comes from the we in a lot of different ways.
I see.
But to more specifically answer your actual question,
Yes.
I think a lot of people can go to therapy for a lot of different reasons. It can be because they're experiencing some sort of distress, anxiety, depression. Maybe you're noticing patterns in your life, like you can't keep a relationship. Maybe you're constantly fighting with your family. You can't hold down a job, for example. You're just noticing patterns of things just not going the way you want. And you're starting to realize, okay, I have a role in this. Something's happening. I'm bringing something to this that I want to work through. So those might be some reasons to seek therapy. And a lot of times individuals come in to work through the relationships in their life. So it's individual therapy, but it's also relational in how we're looking at things.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting way to put it. Actually, to me, it's just like an individual did not feel well, then maybe did not feel well with my relationship. I start that conversation with my fiance, with my girlfriend, with my wife, and take it from there. But would love to hear your perspective of like starting from the family or starting from the that relationship and going like inward or outward. How would you kind of unpack that for us?
Both.
Okay.
So there's the kind of work around going inward in terms of understanding yourself. If I'm showing up in a relationship, I need to understand why I show up the way that I do. People love to talk about how, they're coming into therapy for communication issues.
Yes.
No, you're not. You may have a hard time and you may need some help figuring out effective ways to communicate, but it's not really about needing skills to talk. It's about having an understanding of the belief systems that guide how you show up. And a lot of times we don't know. A lot of times we follow scripts and we inherit beliefs and ideas and values, and we don't question them. And we're impacted by them and we're responding to them outside of our awareness. So there's that individual work of, oh, I see. I know who I am because I understand where I come from. I understand what I've taken, what I've held on to, what I've discarded, what I've brought in, and I can show up from that awareness. And then there's the relational awareness. Really put simply, what happens between you and the other individual? What are the parts of me that show up, that activate the parts of you, and vice versa? So, we talk a lot about how the people in our lives help us, some of them hold up a mirror, some of them highlight parts of ourselves that maybe we haven't quite understood, aren't as aware of, and so they give us a chance to do more of that kind of awareness work individually. So it's kind of a bi-directional thing. The more I know myself, the more I can show up, and the more that I show up, the more you give me opportunities to know myself in a new and different way.
Malek, actually, when she mentioned about what are my background, remember when we spoke with Dr. Isam Khawaja and even Bassem Youssef about when we immigrate from the Middle East, we have all that background of whether amazing culture or culture that doesn't really fit with the new culture that we're joining. So maybe that would you see it in a person, for example, coming and having a hard time integrating with the new society he or she immigrated to, and that struggle of like am I staying here temporarily and my mind's still back in the Middle East, or I need to kind of immerse myself in this new culture and move forward.
Yeah, so that acculturation process that looks differently for everyone.
Yes.
And for some people, they come here and it's really important to hold on tightly to whatever helps them feel connected to their culture, even if it's creating a disconnect in the culture they're in.
Yes.
For other people, it's the total opposite. I need to shed all of this because I want to be accepted and to fit in here. But I think for most of us, you know, we're those third culture kids, right? Where we take a little bit of this and a little bit of that. We pick and choose with what resonates with us. We go through this really beautiful journey of getting to decide, which is not something we always get to do. And I'll speak personally. When I first came here, I didn't realize how much of my identity was handed to me. How many of the choices that I had made were not actually choices I made. They were pre-made and I followed along. And it wasn't until I came here that I started to think of whether or not that resonated with either who I was or who I wanted to be. And that's where that really creative process comes in. Creative, but also painful, of being able to take a cold, hard look at, you know, where you came from, where you are, and creating something new, which comes with its own challenges because there's a loss around how you connect with your culture. You're no longer, you know, completely Lebanese in my case. You know, there are times where I might go to Lebanon and I'll be treated like I'm too American.
Oh, yes.
Right.
And then I'm here and I'm too Lebanese. And so there's a loss there in that you don't get to kind of fully fit in somewhere. And there's a beauty there in that you got to create something that feels right for you with this really rich kind of experience that you've had.
You know, this is actually a very common struggle amongst all immigrants of all backgrounds, and us Arabs also like experience this. And you transition, and like you said, we're like a third culture kids, and we're like adopting a new culture. Do you find it to be a common problem amongst couples that are both from immigrant backgrounds, but they're at different stages of their transition, or one of them has found their new place and another is struggling, and now it's resulting in conflict between the two, which on paper it sounds like it's a perfect connection. You both have the same background, you know, come from the same neighborhood even, and like, so, you know, just you'd think that you have the same values, and then you find like conflict that is just a little bit out of place.
Yes, to all of that. Because especially in my line of work, that acculturation process, I'm a little bit of this, I'm a little bit of that, people tend to do it in a lot of areas in their lives, except for relationships and sex. Those tend to be untouched. So people might show up in therapy saying, you know, and I'm going to use some of like clients' language, not my own. You might say, oh, I thought my partner was much more open-minded, but when it comes to intimacy, they're very closed off, or maybe they're, you know, bringing in beliefs that are more aligned with more conservative values that the other person didn't expect. So they look at every other aspect of their life and they think, okay, yeah, we're going to get along so well. But when it's just the two of them and the doors are closed, some of those beliefs come in and it can take people by surprise. So yes, that shows up a lot in a lot of different ways.
So, you know, we kind of touched base a little bit about the individual aspect, but would love to explore further the relationship part of your practice. You know, been reading a lot of reports. The recent CDC report about marriage and divorce. In 2021, I think it's 6 out of 1,000 in terms of marriages. Divorce, however, is 2.5 out of 1,000. So it's relatively less than half, which is good, I guess. But we always see in like on Forbes recently I was reading almost 50% of marriages end up in divorce. You know, in the U.S. overall, comparison to other nations. Would love to first. Are these number accurate? Are we looking?
Yes.
What's your thought about these percentages and the overall way we can address the high percentage of divorces? Like as a newly married person, you look at it like oh my God, the relationship needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
And of course, thankful to you and that line of practice. There are tools now. If there's any issue, we can address it. We have options now.
Yes.
At least in the U.S. we're talking. So would love to hear more about that aspect from you.
Yeah. So to answer the first part of your question, those numbers are accurate.
Okay.
However, they are only examining married couples, not couples that cohabitate long term.
Okay.
Many queer couples don't get married either because they can't or because they choose not to.
Yes.
So it doesn't factor in relationships as a whole. But when it comes to marriage, the numbers are accurate. And also the other 50% isn't necessarily happy, they're just not divorced. So if you think of it that way,
Yes.
there's a problem.
Yes.
We don't know how to do relationships. We're not taught how to do relationships. And then we're thrown into this
Right.
with, relationships take work, relationships are hard. But we don't actually get to the point of, okay, well, how do you do the work? What does that even mean? What are the skills that you need as an individual and as a couple to be able to thrive? So we don't do that.
Yes.
So numbers are accurate and indicative of a fact that, this is something that parents should be talking to their kids about. It's something that people should be talking to each other more. We don't always have to be presenting the best picture of ourselves. It's okay to talk about your challenges so we can learn from one another in terms of how to get better and stronger as couples, to normalize some of that. So there's that aspect of it. And we also have a lot of tools. We have therapy, we have a new awareness around relationships. So when couples know that they're struggling, and I would actually say early on, coming to therapy can make a world of difference. A lot of couples wait too long.
Okay.
A lot of couples wait till they have, one person has a foot and a half out the door, and then they say, okay, last ditch effort, let's go to therapy. By that point, there's usually a ton of resentment and the work becomes infinitely harder to do. So the sooner you can come in, the better. Preventative. You're noticing you're not quite connecting the way that you used to. That's a good time to come in. The more you wait, the harder it gets, just like any sort of wellness, really.
So relationship therapy shouldn't be the last result. It should be one of the early
Correct.
Options to explore, basically.
Yes.
What are the red flags, or what are the indications that hey, listen, as a couple, let me explore this option?
A few things. One, if you feel like you're having the same fight over and over again, you're stuck in this cycle and you can almost predict, like, okay, you could almost kind of outline, I'm going to say this and they're going to say that. So that stuckness in a cycle, this repetitiveness, it feels like you're having the same fight and getting nowhere, that's generally a sign. If you start to feel like what the Gottmans call the four horsemen, if you start to see a lot of criticism, blame, defensive,ness, contempt, those are big signs that you need to come in. Those are actually some of the biggest predictors of divorce. So if you're noticing that in your relationship, you want to come in. Feeling unsatisfied emotionally, sexually, feeling like you're not connected with your partner, those are all workable things. And people know when they're feeling this. It's not subtle. If you're feeling disconnected from your partner, you are well aware. The question is, one, what do you want to do with that? And two, is your partner going to join you in working on it? Because one of the common things, unfortunately, is that one partner might say, you're the problem. You're the one that needs to work on this. So why don't you go do individual therapy?
Oh, okay.
And one of the bigger predictors of divorce is if one person comes in to work on their marriage. That's usually a sign that there's a deeper problem and that they're not both willing to come to the table.
Wow. And to add to everything that you said is, we live in a pretty high stress environment where everybody's like super work oriented, getting burned out, in and out. We're dealing with a lot of the issues that are happening back home with our families and all the problems that are happening. So there's a lot of external stressors on that relationship, and you often hear people saying like, it's not the time.
Yes.
It's not the time to talk about our emotions. It's not the time to talk about our feelings. It's just like I have too much on my head right now to sit there and try to find the words to express my feelings and my emotions and discuss something that's like very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So how do you feel like couples should be processing or approaching this issue, just dealing with these external stressors and prioritizing their own communication to make us a relationship survive?
Yeah, yeah. And do you mean in terms of specifically therapy and how they would work on things, or individually recommendations for couples?
I would say individually recommendations for couples.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception that if you don't have time to deal with it, then it's going to sit quietly and wait for you to have time.
Mm-hmm.
Your feelings aren't going to be like, oh, okay. Sadness, grief, anger, pain, jealousy, resentment, that's not going to quietly wait. Our feelings have to go through their cycle. They have to. And if they don't, they get trapped in our bodies. And they grow and they grow and they grow. So that time where you as a couple are avoiding, we got soccer practice, we gotta take care of this, there's this, major issue that we're dealing with there. All that is saying to your relationship is trap what you're feeling inside. And the more it grows, the harder it is to deal with, and the more it's going to show up in ways that you don't intend. The more it's going to show up in negativity, in criticism, in withdrawing from your partner, in picking on your partner. And so I think one place to start is to honor your feelings and to find healthy ways to name those feelings, because that's the first step in being able to release it. We use this term a lot, name it to tame it. Once we can put it out there, especially when your partner can receive it with compassion and empathy, it will go away. It will neutralize. There is no emotional state that is permanent. But what we do is we trap it. And then we deal with it when it's out of control.
Right. You often hear people say like, 5 years ago this and this was said, or 3 years ago this and this was on. I'm like,
Yep.
5
The ledger.
years ago, like who do you remember? Yeah, like
ledger.
literally, it's like somebody's stacking all these issues and
Blockchain.
waiting,
It never go away.
and it never goes away.
You're never having one fight. You're having that fight and every other fight you've had about it in the past.
Everything that was missed in the past. Do you typically recommend to your clients or patients to educate themselves about certain aspects of kind of like feeling their feelings and understanding their feelings and understanding their own backgrounds? Because, like you said, in order to name the feeling, you have to understand what you're feeling.
Right.
Sometimes you feel the discomfort or the anxiety around it and you don't know where it's coming from, and you attribute it to the wrong factor, and it goes unaddressed just because you don't know where it's coming from.
Right. And, for different people, and this can be very gendered as well. As someone that was socialized as a woman, I've been given a lot more tools in terms of understanding my feelings, because we allow it, because we accept it, because we encourage it. For men, it can be a lot harder. The running joke is for men, it's either sad or bad. Those are your choices. And sad might even be a stretch. Or for a lot of men, anger is the feeling. When anger is not the primary feeling, anger is the expression, and underneath it might be loneliness, might be grief, might be sadness, might be embarrassment, might be shame. But the only kind of acceptable feeling for men is anger, a lot of times. And so we have to do a lot of work, and you can do that in therapy, but you can also do that on your own. There are a lot of resources out there for really increasing your emotional literacy. There are things, we call the feelings wheel is a really common one, where we'll help people just go through the list and see what resonates with you when you start to learn about, when you expand your vocabulary around feelings. One place to start is in your body, because even if you don't have the language, your body's still feeling it, and you pay attention to that, you get a cue.
Recently I just finished reading a book called Platonic. Talks about people's attachment styles as being a secure, an avoidant, or an anxious. And I'd never heard of this before. I actually saw it by coincidence on TikTok, and I was like really intrigued by the topic. I Googled it and I found the book, and it kind of like explains a ton of things that happened to me with like relationships with friends, with girlfriends, with family, and just seeing why people are doing what they're doing. And I felt like I want to like print the book and hand it out to everybody. Not that I'm more aware than them, but like I'm like, you be more aware of yourself, and you can carry your relationships a lot better when you have that understanding. So my question to you is there any like book or resource or something that comes to mind that you typically recommend to people as like, this is an essential reading, like you got to go do some of your homework?
Yes. And it's actually based off of attachment. There's a book called Attached,
Okay.
which is a great resource, and it helps people understand the ways that they show up in relationships and to develop more language around that. So I'd highly recommend that book.
Okay.
There's a book called Loving Bravely by Alexandra Solomon. It walks you through individual awareness and then what the author calls relational self-awareness, which is answering that question of, am I aware of what it's like to be in a relationship with me? And it includes a lot of prompts to help you kind of explore how you feel, to understand that and where it came from. So I would highly recommend those two books.
Okay, great. We'll make sure to include the links on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to one last thing before we move to the third aspect of your, which is interconnected with this one, is the sex therapy. Just to zoom a little bit closer on the communities of minority communities, Arab American, Muslim communities, and we all know, like back in the Middle East or the third world countries, you see more masculine societies, more women's voices and women's rights are not as loud and as free as the Western world. How do you see that as a cultural background for these communities kind of reflect on the problems they present with, and is your approach different to these communities versus the general population?
So I think if you're talking about patriarchy, that really, I mean, that exists everywhere, not just in our communities, but especially so in our communities. And I think the way that shows up is very, very broad, but essentially it messes with everybody. It messes with women, it messes with men, because patriarchy tells women, here's what you can and can't do, here's what you can and cannot say, it makes you smaller. And patriarchy tells men, you can't have feelings, you can't make space for that. You need to be strong and powerful all the time. And so you have men that are struggling with intimacy because they've never been given permission to be intimate beings. And then you have women that are struggling with being able to name their needs, to take up space. So it hurts everybody across the board. But specifically in the context of relationships, one of the really common ways that shows up is in very rigid gender roles. And I would say rigidity of roles is one of the most common problems that couples come in for.
Okay.
That couples face, period, regardless of whether they're coming in. Because when we're in one role, we get stuck. Like if I'm always in the caretaker role, I always have that hat on. One, eventually I'm going to be pretty resentful because I want to be taken care of. And yet I feel stuck in that role, so it's hard for me to receive. And I'm in the caretaker role, and then my partner wants me to be a lover. That's a totally different role. A lover is a selfish role in the best possible way. And so now my partner's upset with me because I'm not able to connect with them in that way because I'm so stuck in the caretaker role. And yet maybe as a woman, I might have been told that my worth is connected to me being a caretaker. And so that rigidity, connecting one's worth with very specific roles makes it very hard to be flexible, which is what we need in relationships.
Yes.
We need to be able to bounce between the giver and the taker and the caretaker and the one that is being cared for and the protector and the nurturer. Those are roles that every single individual needs to be able to bounce between, to dial up and dial down. And unfortunately, in our communities, patriarchy tells us you can't do that. Here are the two roles you're allowed to have, father, husband. Here are the two roles you're allowed to have, mother, wife. And we get stuck in that.
I see. Do you think that when one of these individuals trying to kind of move to try the role of not being like for example for a woman's standpoint, like when a woman is for some reason the husband lost the job and then the woman now is the provider, and but the expectation from the husband is that in addition to that you need to did the house chores,
Domestic duties, yeah.
plus being a wife at home and raise the kids and all
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. Do you think the couples start having issue when these roles start be disrupted, or they can happen regardless of that particular disruption in the roles?
Both. I think for some people, a major disruption can be the catalyst. It can be something that turns it up so much that they can't avoid it anymore. Mm-hmm. But on some level, by and large, when we're stuck in one role, we can get by as long as everything is just so. And the second something starts to go kind of off the rails, which will happen because we're human beings and that's what happens, it starts to create problems. Really, it's about shifting from stances of rigidity to stances of flexibility. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's those major disruptions that really highlight just how rigid we are because we're like trying so hard to go back to what we know because it's familiar and it's the only thing we know, but everything else is pulling us towards something different and there's too much tension there. Okay. So what is it like to ease into change and adapt to what's happening?
Interesting. So if we were to move on a little bit further into the sex therapy part, sex is the taboo of all taboos in the Middle East and amongst Arab communities. It's exactly, so there's always like a big sense of shame attached to it, and attached to like talking about sex, and let alone talking about it from a desire and a pleasure perspective. So, just on like on a high level, what is sex therapy?
So sex therapy is a specialization within therapy. Mm-hmm. So if you're ever working with a sex therapist, they are also a general therapist as well. That specifically addresses dealing with intimacy-related issues between partners, sexual identity exploration, gender identity exploration, or working through, for example, sexual trauma or out-of-control sexual behaviors. So it covers a pretty wide gamut, but anything that is about enhancing, repairing, or healing when it comes to sexuality and sexual functioning would fall under the realm of sex therapy.
Mm-hmm. What's the prevalence of that, like the abnormalities in that paradigm between partners? Like when, how do you see out of from your clients when they come and you dig deeper into their relationship problem? What's the percentage that the root cause of all this problem is the sex aspect of their relationship?
I don't think that I wouldn't be able to quantify that or even separate it in that way because intimacy is all connected. And if there are issues in the relationship, whether it's lack of emotional intimacy or lack of connection, or maybe there's fears around physical safety or whatever it is, naturally all of that is going to show up in sex. And for some people, the root issue may be a sexual functioning issue that is exasperated by the relationship. Like someone might have, for example, erectile dysfunction, but in their relationship, their partner makes them feel bad about it. Oh man, I can't believe it's happening again. And so now it creates issues in the relationship, which makes the problem even worse. So they kind of reinforce each other and make each other bigger and bigger if they're not addressed.
Okay. And we're when you mentioned the gender identity, I mean it's the trendy topic of the day, right? And do you think, in terms of Arab Americans and the Muslim community, are we having that revolutionary discussion about the gender identity aspect, the diversity and inclusion part? Are you seeing that in our communities, or it's just we're more of an outsider watching on that conversation happening?
I think our community is exceptionally afraid of what they know is inevitable, which is that these conversations need to happen.
Yes.
Because the reality is, being queer has never been a trend. It has been a reality. Really, what's happening now is this is a conversation about whether or not people are coming out. But queer Arabs have always existed. Queer Muslims have always existed. This is not new. And for them, it's always been a function of, trying to figure out how to survive in our communities. What's happening now that it's a little bit different is that there's pressure to have the conversations. A lot of times parents will talk about, especially living here in the West, that, how can they shelter their kids from people of diverse gender identities or diverse sexual orientations. They want to protect their kids. They want to make sure that they don't, and I'm going air quotes crazy over here, but they don't want to expose their kids.
Yes.
The reality is, this is about their own discomfort with having these conversations. And their discomfort with having the conversations is because they don't quite know how to make sense of what they were taught about how people love and make love and how they do gender and what they're seeing around them. And in the face of that discrepancy, it's easier to say, shh, let's avoid, let's hide.
Right.
But we live in a world where you can't do that anymore. And I think we're far behind. But at some point, the Arab community needs to realize that this isn't about whether or not we're going to have the conversation, because the conversation's happening. It's a question of whether or not you want to learn how to do it in healthy and affirming ways.
Okay.
You hear a lot of people, from our generation that had immigrated here, and they say, I look back and a large number of friends that we have before, came out of the country, left the country, and now they came out, where's this coming from? They were all okay when they were back home. It's
right.
They were in the closet. The definition of it is they were in the closet. So it's just not a new thing that just came out. It's a thing that was hidden before. What would be your advice to somebody who's going through the thought process and not knowing how to express themselves or just be themselves or even explore whether this is who they are or not, when they're faced with the risk of retaliation from the community? There's aggressive retaliation from the community.
Right. And the reality is, in order to be able to come out, in order to be able to have these conversations, you need safety. And at this point in time, by and large, our community is not a safe space. And we've got a ways to go before that can change. However, there are sub-communities where people are creating safety, creating support systems. Here in Chicago, we have one of 2 LGBTQI mosques in the world.
Really? Okay.
The Rabia Mosque, it's downtown. The other one is in Toronto. But there are communities, but you have to look for them. You're not going to find it, at a random, community event. But if you're seeking that out, finding a community of people that are safe, that are affirming, can give you a chance to have those conversations, because it's not as simple as, I have the bullet point list of what to check off. We know sexuality is fluid. We know that gender is fluid. And how can you explore that if there's a fear that you will quite literally be unsafe, or that you might get rejected by your community or by your family? So to them, I would say, find your safe spaces, find your community, and see what you can explore about yourself within that context. And don't put pressure on yourself to do that in other areas. It's okay to not come out. It's okay to not, there's a lot of pressure in the West that if you're queer, that you should, be vocal about it. In our communities, that's not always an option, and that's okay.
Right.
That doesn't make it so that your gender or your sexual orientation is any less valid. You're working with what's available to you, safety-wise.
Interesting. That's a very, very interesting point to kind of not go with the pressure that's been on, and every community has its own context that you need to work with. I'm curious. Let's say a couple seeking your advice, and the problem is more of a whether erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, or even from the women's side of vaginal spasm and all these issues. What are the step-by-step that you walk the couple through to kind of address this issue and approach it?
Yeah. So a few things. One, we always work within a wellness team, especially if there's something like erectile dysfunction or vaginal spasms. We want to make sure that our clients have seen a physician, that they've gone through whatever test they need to make sure that it's not a physiological concern. Now, with that, and making sure that that wellness team is in place, the work that we would do is around a variety of things. One, helping understand what's happening between the couple that might be exacerbating those issues. Does one person have a lot of anxiety? Because it's really hard to function sexually if you're in here. What is my partner going to think? Oh my God, am I satisfying them? Oh, my body, I hate how my body looks. Those are not sexy thoughts. If you're in a place of anxiety, chances are you're not being very sexual. And your body is going to listen. Our bodies don't lie. So we start to explore what are some of the thoughts and beliefs that might be impacting sexual functioning. And we start to explore what are some relationship dynamics that might be impacting it. My partner's critical all the time. So I don't want to have sex with them because I'm hurt. I don't feel seen. I don't feel connected to them. So, we explore what might be going on there. And then we start to work on repair. And that might look like working on the relationship to increase sexual empathy, to increase communication so that they're really talking about what's happening. We might look at broadening intimacy, because a lot of people, and this is incredibly common, they think of sex as intercourse. And in the absence of intercourse, there's no intimacy. And what we talk about is that there's actually a lot of different ways to be intimate. You can be emotionally intimate. You can go for a walk and hold hands. That's intimacy. You can do something fun together. That's intimacy. You can have a really stimulating conversation. Like, there are a lot of different ways to be intimate. And there's a lot of different ways to be physically intimate. Touching, caressing, making out, different types of sex. It doesn't have to be intercourse. But the more we can broaden that intimacy library, the more ways in that a couple has to feel close and connected. And it creates this positive loop. The more connected you feel, the more open you are sexually. The more open you are sexually, the more likely you are to be present and engaged and open to your partner. So that would be an overview of what we might do in a lot of cases.
Got it.
Now, if there's something like sexual trauma, or maybe an out-of-control sexual behavior, that's a different type of treatment that would be a little bit more specialized.
And I know every case is different, but overall, what's the average length of that therapy?
It's very, very hard to say that.
Okay.
But we do tell people to expect to commit for at least 4 to 6 months.
Oh, okay.
Because sometimes people will come in and they'll say, oh, therapy didn't work. I went 2 times. That's actually
Yes.
the assessment period.
Yeah.
So we do ask people to give it a shot, and your therapist will check in with you after, the first few sessions. How is it feeling? What's working? What's not? And at each interval, there will be a treatment plan and goals. And so you keep kind of assessing to make sure that you're feeling like things are getting better with time. But it's hard to really say, this is what the length of treatment would be at the beginning.
And let's say they finished the 6 month, everything went well, everything improved. Do you have any like follow-ups or touch-ups, moving forward? Like, is it, I don't want to say like a lifelong therapy, but is it like a long-term, checking in every once in a while or something?
You can, and I tell my clients, my job is to get fired.
Okay.
I want to get to a point where they come into a session and they say, actually, we're not sure what we want to talk about today.
I see, okay.
That's a great sign.
Yes.
And after that, some couples like to do kind of wean off, monthly check-ins, then we take it to every 6 months, and then just as needed. For others, they say, all right, we're doing good, we're going to step out, and knowing that the door is open if they ever need to come back in, because it's really not a linear process, right? There's never a point where it's like, cool, all good, forever and ever till the day we die.
Yes.
Different things happen in life stage transitions, as you go from different child rearing ages to retirement to aging. So all of these are different things that can happen that can create a disconnect in the relationship. So we encourage couples to know that this is a resource for touch-ups, if you will.
How often do you deal with people who have reached a certain level of security in the relationship and like a healthy connection that gets them to a point where they want to try uncharted territories? Somebody has certain desires, certain fetish, whatever it is in their mind, and they want to approach it, and that's a whole different level of trying to communicate that to a partner and just reaching out to see if they're open to it. How often is that conversation happening, and what would be an advice to you for somebody who has the thought in their head but doesn't know how to express it to a partner without, breaking a certain amount of trust in there?
Yeah. And what's interesting is that you use the word trust. Usually people are afraid of being shamed, right? You want what? That's the response that they're terrified of. You're a pervert. That's what they're scared of, basically. It is. I mean,
You're right.
that's the ultimate fear. I think especially around kink and BDSM, just alternative sexual expression, that's the fun stuff. That's when, in the context of feeling good in your relationship, it's playfulness. It's when you get to explore beyond where you've been to access parts of yourself that maybe you've never been able to. So we approach it from the standpoint of play. Maybe in your entire life you occupy a certain type of roles or a set of roles. How fun would it be to try on being more dominant, or to play with this idea of being more submissive? Really from the context of play. It doesn't fundamentally change who you are. It's just allowing you to access different parts of yourself and to try them on and see how they feel, see how it feels with your partner. So one of the key things that we do is we address it as an exploration, and we encourage people to address it as an exploration. You don't know what you're going to like. You might have these fantasies about a certain kink or a certain sexual fetish, and then you try it out and you realize it's not for you. And that's okay too. So being able to give yourself permission to say, I'm exploring, and I don't know how it's going to turn out, but hey partner, can you explore with me? Can be really rewarding for a lot of people. There's something we talk about a lot, and it's from a book called Taking Sexy Back. And it's a triangle. And the triangle has trust, risk, and self-compassion at each end. And the idea behind it, and this is especially relevant for people that want to explore kink or BDSM or different fetishes, is that you can't necessarily say, I want to have complete trust before I take a risk and share something with my partner, a fantasy, an interest, a thought, an ask. Really, you take a risk. And the more risks you take that go well, the more trust you build. And the more trust you build, the bigger risk you can take.
Got it.
And so you kind of got to dip your toes into taking a risk in order to trust more. And the self-compassion piece is that if it goes horribly wrong, and sometimes it will, you can pick yourselves back up. That you're human and that's okay. And you can come back individually and as a couple. So that's kind of a way to think about it that we use a lot. You're taking risks, you're building trust, and if you mess up, that's okay.
Sounds like a process that takes a lot of emotional maturity, self-awareness, a lot of kind of like healthy communication across the board with a partner, in order to get to the point where you can take more risk and kind of like build the reward out of that risk, or not, or take the failure out of it.
Right. And that's where the kink community's got it right, because they have two things that I think everyone should incorporate into their sexual dynamics. Up front, they talk about everything. What are we going to do? What are we hoping to experience? What are our boundaries? What are we curious about? What are we afraid of? So there's that initial conversation about what are we hoping to get out of XYZ encounter? And then there's aftercare. What was that like? How did it feel? What felt good? What do you want to do more of? What do you want to do less of? And that's a chance to really be able to have those conversations in healthy ways, up front and at the end as well.
Lena, what are the general misconceptions about sex therapy that you've faced throughout your practice, or if there are some examples you can give us?
One thing people don't necessarily know is that sex therapy, it's a form of therapy. It's a form of talk therapy. A lot of people are afraid that, they might have to engage in some sort of like touch in front of the therapist. That never happens.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Any sort of homework assignments or activities would be assigned for the couple to do at home. Another misconception is that, and I don't know if this is a misconception per se as much as it's just a false expectation,
Yes.
but couples will go in thinking sex therapy is going to fix a broken partner. I'm high desire, my partner's low desire. I'm going to use sex therapy to make my partner more like I am. That's something that people come in with a little bit, and that's not how it goes.
Like an unrealistic expectation?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because really it's about creating empathy and coming together, not, the language of judgment of fixing your partner.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think those would be two of the biggest ones, that sex therapy is talk therapy. Because there is a type of therapy called surrogate partner therapy that does involve touch in the sessions with the surrogate partner. That is a different thing. For us, it's really about using the lens of sex to talk about a lot of the same things you talk about in general therapy. Beliefs, values, emotions, fears that you have, enhancing communication and intimacy in the relationship through the lens of sex.
So basically, you provide them with the framework
Yes.
to approach it, basically.
And more often than not, what people are coming in for sex therapy, that dynamic is usually showing up in other areas in your life.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't exist in isolation.
Right.
So if you have a couple that's coming in and maybe they have what we call a pursuer-withdrawer dynamic. I'm constantly initiating, I'm constantly trying, and my partner never wants to. Chances are that's happening across the board. And being able to understand it a little bit more through the lens of sex can actually help address it in other areas of the relationship as well.
From our conversation so far, I feel everything is interconnected.
It is.
Like from the sexual standpoint, like the partnership, and even on the individual level, I feel everything. You can track it even to childhood, to growing up,
Yes.
and how that affected your life overall. It's really interesting.
It is very integrated. There is no way to do this work without taking into consideration the I, the we, the world, the context of that time, the family of origin. Like you can't do this work in an overly simplistic way.
Yes.
And there are some types of therapy that are kind of very, brief, solution focused. That doesn't work so well in this type of work. Because
Holistic approach.
Right, we're too
Yes.
complex. We're too complex for that.
Yes.
And so as a systemic therapist, which is what marriage and family therapists are, we're constantly taking into consideration the bigger systems that a person is a part of or a couple is a part of.
How did the Arab American community and Muslim community kind of receive that option? Like, like here in Chicago, before we met through NAP, through my education, I went to medical school and did residency. I know that option exists, but from the community that I interact with, that option never comes up, right?
Right.
Like in Arab Americans and even like with the broader Muslim community. So how did they receive that there is an option that is provided through your practice here in Chicago with the Chicagoland area? Because I'm not sure there's a lot of Arab therapists like this. Are there here in Chicago? No, yeah.
Not a lot.
So if you can tell us more about that point.
It's hard to say how it was received because people try not to talk about it. So, I don't know if I could necessarily answer that question, but I can say this. From the referrals that we get from the clients reaching out, the message that we typically get, or specifically the message that I specifically get is, there's nowhere else for me to go. Because I want to work with someone that's going to understand my culture and my background, but also is going to allow me to make space for all of these other aspects of my identity. And there's a really big demand for that right now. And people don't talk about it, but if you're sitting at a dinner table with a group of people, there's a pretty high percentage that the vast majority of the people at that table in some way, shape, or form are struggling. Not necessarily in large ways, big ways, small ways, whatever it is. But no one wants to say anything.
That's not a dinner conversation.
I mean, it is for me, but
Yeah.
it's also why people don't invite me to dinners
Yeah.
anymore. But we're joking, but in a way, I tend to forget sometimes
Yes.
that, we're because I see my own therapist, and I might make a reference of, oh yeah, my therapist said, blah blah
Oh,
blah.
okay.
What?
Really? Wow.
I'm a therapist, but you're a therapist. Yes, and I'm a human.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, yes.
And I think there's a lot of normalizing that still needs to happen.
Do you feel your background in marketing kind of helping with the messaging for the Arab American? Like when you want to, let's say on social media, you want to create a message for Arab American, like that segment of the market, you want to reach to them.
Sure.
Do you put that into perspective when you do the messaging?
Yes, I can use kind of my advertising background, but I'm going to be honest, I don't have to sell what I do because people are hungry for it. People are having a hard time. They want to be more emotionally fulfilled. They want to be sexually fulfilled. They want to have good sex. Everybody keeps telling them it's awesome and they're not having it. They want to.
Right.
There's what's shifted now is that we are beyond that point where intimacy, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, is a bonus. It has now become something that we expect in our relationships. Nobody wants the marriage of duty anymore. And so from that place, you have people that are saying, I want to feel good in this relationship, and I don't. Really, it doesn't take much. All it takes is a subtle invitation, and people will pay attention.
What would be your advice to an Arab immigrant who's trying to live a fulfilling and authentic life, despite of all the struggles and all the other stresses that are happening in their life?
Yeah. That's tough because, I wish I had a nice simple answer like, drink more orange juice, but I don't. But I will say this, I wouldn't say despite all the struggles. I would say because of all the struggles, as immigrants, we have this unique position of experiencing a very, very rich emotional world. We've seen a lot, we experience a lot. Nothing is ever cut and dry when you're an immigrant. There's always layers. And if you can shift it to that being about being exciting, being interesting, it can open up the door for a mindset that is more exploratory than it is limited. So one thing I just to say, and I know I'm offering a non-answer to your question, but I will answer your question, is that our experience is actually the gateway to a more expansive view in the world. And to actually answer your question, I would say, if you think of it, and this is something I actually talk about with couples a lot, there's no one thing. You got this jar, and you want to keep putting marbles in it. A marble might be self-care. A marble might be flirting with your partner. A marble might be expressing appreciation and gratitude. A marble might be meditating and getting into your own body, whatever it is. But your goal is to keep putting in as many marbles as you can, because the challenges are going to come and they're going to take a whole bunch of those marbles out. So you just want to make sure you keep replenishing it so that you have a nice, healthy stock of kind of credits for when things get tough.
That's an interesting perspective.
So we have a fire round now.
Oh dear. Have you not noticed?
Fire away.
Fire round doesn't work for me because I just keep talking. Like, give me 45 minutes to answer that fire round question.
In as few of words as possible, what motivates you? What inspires you on a day-to-day basis to get up and keep going and keep moving?
Yeah. Oof. Fire round means I say quickly, right? Okay. Honestly, people. They fascinate me. We are just this amazing collection of stories and beliefs and ideas and histories, and I get the benefit of being in a job where every single day I get to sit with another human being that is opening up to me. And that there's an energy that comes with that I haven't been able to find in any other area of my life.
Beautiful.
Also my kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had to throw that in.
Yeah.
What is the most challenging moment you've been through in your journey with your practice, with your work, with your immigration journey?
I'm pathologically optimistic, so it's actually hard for me to think of, challenging moments. I tend to move on from them, but I think one of the challenges in this particular line of work is that a lot of times my identity was questioned by people in my world, whether it's my relationship with religion or my relationship with this culture, because of assumptions made about me because of the work that I do. And that's been tough. Tough feeling like I have to sometimes justify my Arabness or my Muslimness, not a word, but it is now. So I would say that's been a challenging part of it.
Interesting. Well, on the flip side, what has been the best moment or something really that just comes to mind as a happy moment?
As a happy
in that
moment.
journey?
Career-wise or in general?
Life.
I would say in life, yeah.
I'm gonna get brownie points for this, but unfortunately it's the truth. Meeting my husband.
Okay.
I am who I am because of him. And I wouldn't be able to have done this work and gone on this journey if he didn't give me the compassion and the safety and the unconditional love that I needed to do that. And the push.
Just wanna comment on this. In your perspective, do you they say that choosing your partner is one of the most important decisions in life because it will affect your life, your career, every single aspect of your life. Do you agree with this
Yes.
statement? Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Your partner, and it doesn't matter whether or not the relationship lasts, but there's a power to being in a relationship where it's not just the intimacy of we feel good together and you see me at my best and you see the good in me. There's the intimacy of you see my ugly and you love me anyway. When you have that, then you can safely explore. Then you can try on whatever you want in life because you know that no matter what, you're loved. And I think that touches a little bit on that attachment that you were talking about before.
Right.
Fundamentally, we need that from when we're this big to the moment we die. We never stop needing that.
Right.
So yes, if you have a partner that can give you that,
Amazing.
Beautiful
try not to
advice.
get divorced.
Sebastian is about to get married, so it's a good advice. Well, we really enjoyed the conversation. There's a lot more that we can chat about, so I'm sure we'll keep the conversation going in the future.
There's the last question in the fire round. Describe yourself in one word.
Oh.
Describe myself in one word?
Or how would somebody describe you in one word?
Okay, so those are very different. So
Let's talk about both.
I would describe myself as magical
Okay.
because why the hell not? I got to choose whatever I wanted. My friends would probably describe me as compassionate.
Okay.
Awesome.
But I like
Okay.
magical more, so I'll go with that.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, Lena. Good luck with your practice. Good luck with your mission, and we learned a lot today, honestly.
Hey, great.
And we always recommend great individual like yourself. We're so happy that we know you, and we'll definitely stay in touch.
Well, thank you for having me and for opening up a space to have these conversations. They're important, and I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.